Whatever happened during the day, tea at 4 o'clock made everything manageable again. It always did. Whatever had gone wrong, the burst pipe, the letter from the school, the worry about money that sat at the back of the mind like a stone in a shoe, it could wait. It could wait while the kettle came to the boil, while the pot was warmed with a splash of hot water and then tipped into the sink, while the tea went in, 1 spoon per person and 1 for the pot, while the lid went on, the cozy pulled down over it. That thick, woolly thing, shaped like a cottage or a fat hen, and the whole small ceremony was observed with the seriousness it deserved. It could all wait, because tea at 4 o'clock was not merely a drink. It was a declaration that the world, however unsteady, still had a foundation. That someone, somewhere in the house, was attending to things. That the kitchen was alive and warm and yours. Let us begin at the beginning, then. Not at 4 in the afternoon, but at the very start of the day, when the kitchen was still dark and the lino was at its coldest. Because a day in a British kitchen in the 1960s did not begin with a switch being flicked and a machine humming to life. It began with a person. Imagine it is a Tuesday morning in November, somewhere in England. A terraced house in Coventry, perhaps, or a semi-detached in Bradford, or a small council house on the edge of a market town in Suffolk. The bedroom is cold. The windows have been painted shut since 1953, and the condensation has frozen on the inside of the glass. The alarm goes off at 6:30. A small round clock with a face that glows faintly in the dark, and a woman rises. Not dramatically, not cheerfully. She rises the way women of that generation always rose, without fuss, without ceremony, pulling her housecoat from the back of the door and stepping into her slippers. And those slippers meet the lino. Night, cold as a church floor in January, hard as ceramic beneath the thin soles of a worn slipper. It was often a marbled pattern, green and cream, or a deep burgundy threaded with gold, or sometimes a plain black and white check, the kind that made the kitchen feel almost continental if you squinted and forgot about the condensation dripping down the window. By the cooker, there was always a patch of wear, a slight scuffing where the same feet had stood, day after day, year after year, and the pattern had quietly rubbed away. No one replaced it. It simply became part of the floor's character, the way a good rug develops a path where the most loved feet have passed. She crosses the kitchen in the gray pre-dawn, the light outside the window, a dim smear of street lamp and cloud, and she reaches for the box of matches on the shelf above the cooker. The New World gas cooker, cream-colored, with the grill at eye level and 4 burners on top, stands against the wall like a faithful old serpent. She turns the knob on the front left burner. The gas hisses. The match is struck. There is that brief, sharp sulfur smell, that tiny flare of warmth in the cold air, and the burner pops and gutters, and then settles into a low, steady blue ring of flame. She fills the kettle at the sink. The Scott water heater above the sink is not yet lit. That will come later, and the water from the cold tap comes out icy, clattering into the aluminium kettle in a narrow jet that sounds, in the silence of early morning, almost deafeningly loud. The kettle goes on the burner, and the day has begun. Do you remember the sound of the gas popping on? And the scrape of the match? That small, decisive sound. The tick of the ignition, the brief pause, the soft hump of the flame catching, was the sound of the day being called to order. Before kettles that boiled themselves, before timers and digital displays, there was just that. A match, a hiss, a flame. Something entirely human about it. Something that required your presence, your attention, your hands. The kitchen did not run without you. It needed you there. The kettle took its time. Aluminium kettles, or perhaps the newer stainless steel ones, did not boil quickly, and there was a particular art to knowing when they were close. First, the faint ticking of the metal expanding, then a low moan, barely audible, then the first wisps of steam from the spout, and then, gradually, that rising note, almost musical, almost urgent, that built toward the full whistle. The steam would cloud the window above the sink, adding another layer to the condensation already running in long rivulets down the glass. A whole landscape of water on that kitchen window. You could draw in it with a fingertip. Children always did. While the kettle built toward its announcement, the first task of the day was the milk. The back door would be opened, briefly, reluctantly, letting in a slice of cold November air, and the bottles retrieved from the step. 2 pints of silver-topped Britich, the foil lid sometimes punctured already, not by absent-mindedness, but by a blue tit, one of those bold little birds that had learned, decades before, that the cream at the top of a milk bottle was worth the trouble of pecking through the foil. The robin sometimes watched from the fence, interested but unsure. The milk was brought in, 1 bottle in each hand, and set on the formica worktop with a small clunk that echoed in the quiet kitchen. And now, here, in these first days of December, something different. On the step, where the silver tops usually stood, there was this morning a bottle with a gold foil cap. Just one. The milkman had left it without comment, without ceremony, but its presence on the step was unmistakable. And when you saw it, you knew that something was different. Something was about to begin. We shall come back to that gold-topped bottle. Hold it in your mind for a moment. The kettle whistled. That sharp, climbing note. Familiar, imperative, absolutely right. Cut through the morning silence, and the gas was turned down with a click, the whistle dropping away into silence. The pot had been warming since the first handful of water went in. Now, the water went in properly. A good pour, covering the leaves, the lid on, the tea cozy pulled firmly down. And that was the first cup of the day. Not a ceremony yet, just the first act of a domestic liturgy that would be repeated without variation, without question, perhaps 6 or 7 or 8 times before the day was done. The tea, that first cup, was strong, Indian or Ceylon. Loose leaves in a brown Betty teapot with a slightly chipped spout that dripped no matter how carefully you poured. Typhoon, perhaps, or Brook Bond dividend, the kind you save the dividend stamps from, sticking them into little cardboard books and exchanging them for items from the catalog. PG Tips with its chimpanzees, their grinning faces on the packet since the mid-50s, the television adverts that made children laugh. The milk went in first. It always went in first in this kitchen, whatever the argument said, and the tea was poured on top, and the color that resulted was that particular warm toffee brown that no cup of coffee, no glass of anything else, has ever quite replicated. The weight of the mug in your hand, the steam rising in a thin column, the first small sip, just slightly too hot, that warmed you from the chest outward like a coal fire in a small room. Breakfast in the British kitchen of the 1960s was not elaborate. It was not meant to be. For the children, there might be porridge in the colder months, made properly on the hob with oats and water and a pinch of salt, stirred until it thickened, poured into bowls, and eaten with milk and a spoon of golden syrup from the Lyle's tin, with its grinning lion. Or there was toast, made under the grill and brought to the table, butter already melted into it. That particular form of toast that is soft where the butter has soaked in and just barely crisp at the edge. The kind that no pop-up toaster has ever quite managed. A boiled egg, 3.5 minutes, set in a china egg cup, the top cut off with a knife and the yolk still gently trembling. Eaten with soldiers, strips of buttered toast cut slim and dunked until they softened and came away golden. For the father, there might be bacon, back bacon, thick cut from the butcher, fried in the pan with the fat spitting and jumping, and perhaps a tomato halved and laid alongside it in the same fat, going soft and sweet and slightly charred at the edges. The wireless played through all of this, not loudly. A murmur from the corner of the kitchen where the set sat on a small shelf. Its dial a gentle amber in the morning light. The BBC Home Service, or the light program. The calm, unhurried voice of the announcer. The 8 o'clock news. Perhaps later in the day, workers' playtime, or the Archers at 1:15. Its opening bars, that jaunty, brassy little tune, as regular and inevitable as the tide. Before the family came to the breakfast table, though, and before the bacon went on, there was the larder, the pantry, a small room, sometimes just a deep cupboard, off the main kitchen, with tiled walls and wire shelves, and a coolness that was its own kind of climate. You stepped in, and the temperature dropped. There was a smell in there that was specific and unrepeatable. A faint mustiness from the tins, the sweetness of jam and golden syrup and dried fruit, the vinegary sharpness of the Branston pickle jar with its slightly sticky lid, the dark, fermented richness of the Marmite. Boogie. On the wire shelves, the tins were arranged with a precision born of habit. Heinz tomato soup, Heinz cream of chicken, Frey Bento's corned beef, John West salmon for special occasions, tinned peas, tinned peaches, a tin of carnation evaporated milk, the Bisto gravy powder in its red and white packet, the HP sauce bottle, thick and brown as molasses, used sparingly because it was not cheap, the Heinz salad cream in its distinctive bottle, that pale yellow sauce that appeared on everything from hard-boiled eggs to tinned sardines, and was, in its own way, a condiment of almost reckless optimism. And there, on the back of the second shelf, half hidden behind the tin of golden syrup, something else. A bottle, tall dark brown glass, with a label that had been there since before you could remember. A Scottish soldier in a kilt, a turbaned Indian servant behind him, standing in a posture of impossible servility that no one questioned at the time. Camp coffee, chicory and coffee essence, mixed together in a sweet, dark, slightly synthetic liquid that bore almost no resemblance to actual coffee, but had been a wartime household staple when real coffee was almost impossible to find. The bottle was perhaps a quarter full, perhaps less. It had been there for years. You had never, not once, seen anyone open it and use it, and yet no one ever threw it away. We shall come back to that bottle too. There was a reason it stayed. Elevenses arrived at 10:30, as reliably as the postman. The kettle again. That rising note, those first curls of steam on the window, and the biscuit tin was brought to the table. A Huntley and Palmers tin, perhaps, or a McVitie's one, with a lid that fitted tightly and required a firm press on both sides to open. Inside, digestive biscuits, their slight sweetness and wheaten crumble. A few rich tea, flat and pale and modest. Perhaps a custard cream if someone had been to the shops recently. A lone bourbon at the bottom, saving for someone. Though no one could agree who. The tea was made again. The pot warmed, the leaves measured, the cozy pulled down. And 2 mugs were carried to the table, and there was a pause in the morning. Just a pause. 10 minutes of warmth, and something sweet, and the sound of the radio and the lino under your feet, and the condensation still running down the window like slow rivers. Was your mother's biscuit tin a particular shape? A particular pattern? Did she have the tin with the royal family on the lid, bought for the coronation in 1953, now holding its 3rd or 4th generation of biscuits, or one of the round tins with a painting of a thatched cottage in summer? The kind that suggested an England that had never quite existed, but was deeply comforting to believe in. The biscuit tin was as much a part of the kitchen's character as the cooker or the sink. It had its own logic, its own rhythm of filling and emptying, and its position on the shelf was fixed as firmly as the plates in the cupboard or the tea caddy beside the pot. For the children, the midday meal was school dinner. Not lunch, dinner, dinner. That was important. The school dinner was the main hot meal of the day, and it followed a rotation as predictable as a church calendar. Monday was likely to be a stew or a meat pie. Tuesday, perhaps minced beef with mashed potato. Wednesday, liver and onions, which was endured rather than enjoyed. Thursday brought the possibility of something slightly better. A chop, perhaps, or a sausage. And Friday was always fish. It was always fish on Friday. Fish in white sauce, or fish cakes, or fish fingers in those later years, set out in a row and accompanied by a mound of mashed potato and a pool of bright, vivid, mushy peas that smelled of summer fields, filtered through a tin. The puddings were what the children waited for. Spotted dick with custard. Bird's custard, made from powder. That sunny yellow liquid poured generously from a jug. Skin-free because this was school and not home. Jam roly-poly, warm and dense. The jam bleeding outward into the sponge. Tapioca pudding, which the children called frog spawn, and ate with the resigned grimace of the sentence. Rice pudding, pale and creamy, with a brown skin on top that some children loved and fought over, and others regarded with the horror reserved for something almost alive. What was the one meal your mother made that you hated then, and would give anything to taste again now? Because most of us had one. Tripe and onions, perhaps. That pale, rubbery, slightly medicinal dish that came from the tripe dresser at the market and was cooked gently in milk until it softened and the onions melted into it. Or liver, fried hard and served with a thin grayish gravy that smelled of iron and duty. Or semolina, that smooth, slightly gluey pudding served in a bowl that was never quite warm enough and eaten to the sound of someone else scraping theirs with a spoon as if it were delicious. These were the tastes we resisted. These were the meals that were placed before us without negotiation, because food was not wasted. Not then. Not in kitchens that still carried the memory of rationing in every spare jar, every saved bread heel, every carefully scraped plate. In the afternoon, the kitchen changed its character. The urgency of breakfast was past. The school run, the husband's dinner, the morning's tasks, all behind. The kitchen in the afternoon was a quieter place, a slower place. And it was in the afternoon that the women who ran those households did some of their best work. The table was cleared, the draining board stacked and left to dry. There were no dishwashers in houses like these. That was a luxury that existed in magazines, not yet in Coventry or Bradford, and the afternoon's cooking began. Baking happened on Thursdays in most households, though some managed it twice a week, and a few extraordinary women seemed to bake every day. The kitchen permanently warm and sweet-smelling. A dusting of flour always on the worktop beside the mixing bowl. Mixing bowl was large and cream-colored, glazed inside and out, solid and permanent. The kind that nested inside a slightly larger one, both of them things that would last a lifetime. Butter, hard from the larder, was beaten with the wooden spoon until it yielded, the sugar going in next with its faint crunch, and then the eggs, one at a time. A child, if home from school and trusted, might be allowed to stir, just for a moment, because the mixture needed to be right and children's arms grew tired. But the moment of being allowed to stir, and then to scrape the bowl with a finger and bring it to your mouth for that sweet, eggy, buttery rawness, that was a privilege. One of those small, wordless gifts that a kitchen gave out without ceremony. Victoria sponge, perhaps, or a Madeira cake, dense and golden, with a strip of lemon peel pressed into the top. A tea loaf, dark with dried fruit, soaked overnight in cold tea. The kind of frugal alchemy that turned yesterday's surplus tea and a handful of currants into something you'd eat, buttered at 4 o'clock, and think you were rich. Rock cakes on a Tuesday, slightly rough-textured and heavy with dried fruit, eaten warm from the oven with a cup of tea while they were still at their best. Fairy cakes for the children. Small, sweet, topped with water, icing tinted faintly pink or yellow, and occasionally, for a birthday or a special Sunday, a Battenberg, its neat pink and yellow squares revealed with the cutting of the knife, the marzipan wrapping giving it an air of festivity that made even a quiet Tuesday feel like an occasion. Do you remember when you first got an electric kettle or a fridge, and the way it changed the kitchen sound? Because there was a day. And many of us can place it roughly, pin it to a particular year in the early to mid-60s, when the kitchen's texture shifted slightly. Perhaps it was the Russell Hobbs electric kettle appearing on the worktop, that sleek, efficient thing that boiled water without the hob, without the gas, without the slow building of the aluminium kettle's whistle. It was convenient. It was modern. But something small was lost. The relationship between the person and the kettle was slightly reduced. The kitchen became a little more automatic and a little less intimate. The Electrolux fridge, too. That small, rounded thing with the tiny icebox at the top that required defrosting every few weeks. The ice built up so thickly that the door barely closed. Changed the larder's purpose. Less reason to go daily to the greengrocer. Less need to plan so carefully around what kept and what didn't. Progress was real. No one who had ever lost milk in summer to a warm pantry would argue otherwise. But with each small convenience, something of the kitchen's character quietly altered. The sound of a kitchen that runs partly on human memory and partly on ingenuity is different from the sound of a kitchen that runs on electricity. Both are homes, but only one of them has that particular quality of aliveness. And then, 4 o'clock, the heart of it, the moment this whole long day had been moving toward, unhurriedly, the way a river moves toward the sea without ever seeming to be in a hurry at all. The children came home from school. The back door opened. That sound, that particular creak and rattle, and the cold air came in with them. The smell of November damp on their school coats, the mud of the playground, the faint institutional smell of school corridors clinging to their blazers. They dropped their bags with a clatter that shook the lino, pulled off their shoes without undoing the laces, and stood in the kitchen in their socks. The pattern of the lino under their feet, that cold, hard solidity, and they were home. And the kettle was already on. Because it was 4 o'clock, and the tea was being made. And whatever the day had brought, the scraped knee, the poor mark in arithmetic, the falling out with a friend at morning break, it could be managed now. It could be managed with tea. The table was set, the pot under its cozy, the milk jug, the sugar bowl, the cups and saucers, or mugs in more relaxed households, thick white ones that held the heat longer and felt satisfying in both hands. Bread was sliced and buttered. White bread, a little dense, mother's pride or sunblest from the bakery delivery, the knife spreading the butter thick and unevenly, in the way that only home-buttered bread ever is. Or toast, if there was time, made under the grill and brought quickly before it went cold. Jam on the table. Hartley's strawberry, or Robertson's raspberry with its Gollawog label that the children collected from the jars and sent away for badges, the transaction feeling perfectly normal, and the world not yet having found it otherwise. Perhaps a slice of the cake made that morning, still slightly warm, set on a plate with a small knife. Perhaps a Jaffa cake, if the tin had been replenished. Perhaps nothing else at all, because bread and butter with a pot of strong tea was not inadequate. It was enough. It was more than enough. The cup of tea at 4 was different from the one in the morning. The morning cup was a necessity, functional, sharp, restoring. The 4 o'clock cup was a reward. It tasted of earned rest. The strong, slightly bitter Indian tea, the full cream milk giving it that pale toffee color, the small film across the surface that meant the milk was real and good. You held the cup or mug in both hands, and you sat down. Not for long, perhaps. There were still things to do before supper, but for this moment, the kitchen held you, and you let it. Outside, in 1965, the world was changing. The Beatles were on the wireless. The new tower blocks were going up on the edge of town. The first Sainsbury's supermarket was appearing on the high street, with its unfamiliar rows of shelves and its self-service confusion. But in here, at 4 o'clock, none of that reached the kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked. The kettle, already cooling, ticked too. The radio played something quiet and reasonable. And the tea was hot, and the bread was buttered. And everyone who needed to be home was home. No one ever said "I love you" in so many words. They just put the kettle on. Now let us step back for a moment into Sunday. Because Sunday in a British kitchen in the 1960s deserves its own chapter, its own quality of attention, its own particular reverence. Sunday was the day the kitchen declared itself. Sunday was the day the full measure of what a kitchen could do, and what a woman could do within it, was on display. The smell came first. Before you were properly awake, it had already arrived, rising through the floorboards, drifting under the bedroom door, filling the landing with a warmth that was almost visible. The beef or the lamb, already in the oven by 10:30, turning slowly in its own fat. The dripping. That particular smell, fatty and profound, with a savoriness that exists nowhere else in the English kitchen, sputtering at the base of the roasting tin. The potatoes, parboiled, and then turned into the hot fat to crisp, their cut surfaces already developing that particular golden carapace. You came downstairs in your Sunday clothes, and the kitchen was a different room. It was fuller. The windows ran with condensation from the boiling of the greens, cabbage or sprouts in winter or peas in summer, and the hob was busy, 3 or 4 things on at once. The woman of the house moving between them with a practiced calm that looked effortless and was anything but. What was your mother's standard Sunday roast? Beef, with the Yorkshire pudding made in the same tin the meat had rested in, the fat still hot, the batter poured in and rushed back to the oven to rise. That great puffed, golden, slightly eggy thing that was everything? Or lamb, with a mint sauce she made herself by chopping fresh mint from the garden into a small jug with sugar and a splash of malt vinegar, a sharp, sweet, green-smelling thing that cut through the richness of the fat. Or chicken, a luxury in the early part of the decade before intensive farming brought prices down. Roasted pale gold, the skin rendered crisp, the lemon pushed inside, giving it a brightness that filled the kitchen with something almost Mediterranean. The gravy was always made from the pan, the fat tipped off, the dark, sticky residue dissolved with water and the juices from the resting meat. A spoon of Bisto, stirred in to thicken and darken, tasted and salted and reduced on the hob until it was right. There was no recipe for this gravy. There never had been. It was learned at the elbow of a mother who had learned it from hers. The Sunday dinner table was the one time the whole family sat down together without question. There was a formality to it. The carving was done by the father, or at least it was meant to be, though in practice the mother was often the more competent carver and everyone knew it, and the plates were warm. And the serving was done with a slightly theatrical generosity that said, "This matters. We are together. This is what we are." 2 vegetables. Always 2. Carrots and peas. Or carrots and cabbage. Or sprouts and roast parsnip in winter. The parsnips done in the same tray as the potatoes. Their edges caramelized dark. And then the silence of eating. Not an awkward silence, but a companionable one. The kind that means everyone is attending to their food with the seriousness it deserves. After the roast came the pudding. Always. On Sundays, there was always a pudding. Perhaps a jam roly-poly, rolled up in a tea towel and boiled in a pan of water on the hob for the required time. The steam filling the kitchen with a sweet, starchy warmth. Then unwrapped on the board and cut into thick slices. The jam gleaming at the center of each spiral, the bird's custard poured generously from the yellow jug. Or a bread and butter pudding, made from bread 3 days old, and therefore perfectly suited to it. Sliced thin, buttered, layered in the dish with currants and a scatter of nutmeg. The egg and milk custard poured over, and the whole thing baked until the top was golden, and the custard set with a slight wobble. Or rice pudding, the long way, made in the oven in a wide dish, a full 90 minutes at a low heat until a dark skin formed on top, and the rice beneath was thick and creamy and almost caramelized at the edges. A spoon of Hartley's jam swirled into it at the table. The skin, always a controversy. Some refused it with passion. Others would scrape the whole dish for it. Monday came, and with it, bubble and squeak. This was not a recipe. It was the leftover potatoes and greens from Sunday mashed or roughly chopped together, shaped into a rough cake and fried in beef, dripping until both sides were darkly crusted and the inside was soft and yielding. The smell of it frying, that slightly savory, slightly sweet smell of browning potato in hot fat, was Monday's smell. The sound of it, the sizzle as it hit the pan, the slight settling, the occasional pop of steam, was Monday's sound. It was eaten for dinner at midday, perhaps with a cold slice of leftover roast pressed alongside it. And it was in its way the finest thing the week's kitchen produced. Honest, thrifty, deeply satisfying, and entirely without pretension. You probably haven't tasted a proper dripping sandwich in 40 years. The bread heel, saved from the loaf's end, spread with the beef dripping from the jar beside the cooker, the jelly at the bottom of the dripping, spread first, and then the fat itself, and a sprinkle of salt. That was it. Nothing else. It tasted of something so specific to a time and a place that even describing it is a kind of inadequacy. It tasted of economy made beautiful, of hunger made manageable, of the knowledge that nothing in that kitchen would go to waste, because nothing in that kitchen could afford to. The larder's tins came into their own on the days between markets. Heinz tomato soup, heated in a saucepan with half a tin of water, stirred until the lumps dissolved into a uniform. Vivid orange, served in a cup or a bowl, with 2 slices of bread and margarine alongside. The taste of that soup is the taste of every Thursday lunchtime, every rainy Wednesday, every day when the butcher hadn't been called on, and the fridge held only half a pint of milk and a scraping of dripping. Fried bentos, corned beef, the tin with the key that you wound around its lip to remove the top, the beef coming out in its rigid, jellied block, sliced and eaten with Branston pickle and bread, or fried in a hash with onions and leftover potato. Tinned sardines on toast, the oil from the tin spread across the bread first, the fish laid on top and pressed flat, eaten with a squeeze of malt vinegar or a scraping of Heinz salad cream. Pilchards in tomato sauce, tinned spaghetti hoops, poured onto toast and consumed with the unself-conscious pleasure of people who have not yet been taught to be ashamed of simple food. The tins were not poverty, or rather, they were a response to the possibility of poverty, to the memory of it, the recent, visceral, wartime memory of food running short. Rationing had ended in 1954, a full decade before the midpoint of our story, and the relief of it was still present in the way the larder was stocked. There was always more than was needed. Always a spare tin of soup, a second can of Heinz baked beans, another packet of Bird's custard powder at the back of the shelf. Because you never knew. Because living memory held the years when you might not be able to get what you needed, and the habit of provision, of keeping the shelves stocked, of not using the last of anything without replacing it, was not waste. It was wisdom. Baked beans deserved their own moment of ceremony. Heinz. Always Heinz. In that deep orange sauce, heated in a saucepan and poured over toast that had been buttered generously. The toast had to be buttered, or the beans were merely beans on bread, which was something entirely other, and eaten at the kitchen table with a mug of tea alongside. This was supper on Tuesdays. This was high tea on a cold Friday, when the chippy felt too expensive. This was the last resort and the reliable comfort, and the food that asked nothing of you and gave back more than you expected. Friday, of course, was the chippy. The fish and chip shop, a 10-minute walk away down the end of the street, its windows running with condensation, its smell carrying a full 50 yards on a cold evening. That smell of hot, fat, and salt and vinegar, and the faint fishiness that was never quite unpleasant, always slightly exciting. The order was placed through the foggy glass. Cod and chips, twice, or haddock, if they'd run out of cod, or skate if you were particularly adventurous. The paper was that day's newspaper, the Daily Mirror, or the Daily Express, and the chips were wrapped inside it, and the fish on top, and the whole parcel was handed over hot enough to warm your hands through the paper as you carried it home. You ate it at the kitchen table, or sometimes directly from the paper on the draining board, the vinegar soaking through, the chips soft under their battered carapace, the fish flaking white and tender inside its crisp coating, the lino under your feet, the kettle already on for the tea that would follow, the kitchen smelling of vinegar and salt long after the paper had gone in the bin. High tea, in the northern and working-class homes where the tradition was strongest, was the evening meal proper. Not the light snack of the South, but a substantial sitting-down occasion. Kippers from the fishmonger, split and grilled under the gas, their flesh turning from translucent to gold, the smell filling every room in the house and lingering for the rest of the evening in the curtains and the cushions. Cold meat with pickles, a slice or two of pressed tongue from the butcher, or brawn, that pale gelatinous terrine of pig's head that required a particular kind of appetite but rewarded it, eaten with beetroot from a jar and a thickly spread slice of white bread. Scotch eggs on Saturdays, bought from the pork butcher. Those firm, tea-stained, boiled eggs inside their dense sausage meat shell, the breadcrumb casing fried to a dark gold, eaten cold with a scraping of HP sauce. Sausage rolls, their pastry slightly flaky, the sausage meat inside pink and well-seasoned. Pork pies, with their stiff hot water pastry, and the layer of gray jelly between meat and crust that divided households as firmly as politics. Supper, for those who had eaten their main meal at midday, was simpler. Bread and butter with a pot of tea, perhaps a small amount of cheese, a piece of cheddar or a scraping of Shipham's fish paste from the small jar, and a few biscuits, or Welsh rarebit, the cheddar melted with a splash of Worcestershire sauce, and some dry mustard and spread on toast, browned under the grill until it bubbled and blistered. The kitchen quiet by this point in the evening, the day's business done, the wireless still murmuring from its shelf, the clock on the wall ticking its steady, unperturbed rhythm. As the year turned, the kitchen turned with it. Spring brought the relief of lighter evenings, the greens from the garden coming early, the first new potatoes from the local greengrocer, those small, smooth-skinned things that needed nothing more than boiling in salted water with a sprig of mint, tossed in butter, eaten as a meal in themselves with a knob more butter and a sprinkling of salt. Summer brought the garden's bounty to the kitchen, runner beans strung and sliced on the wooden board, gooseberries stewed with sugar, strawberries made into jam while they were still at their best. The jam-making day, a whole kitchen event with the muslin pan on the hob, and the steam filling the room and the waxed paper circles, pressed onto the surface of each pot before the lid went on. The pantry filled up in summer, the shelves lined with jars, plum, raspberry, blackcurrant, apple, and ginger, arranged in rows with handwritten labels in a familiar hand, dated and catalogued against the winter that was always coming. Autumn was the smell of apples and the sound of the preserving jar being sealed. And then December and Christmas, and the kitchen at its most extraordinary. The Christmas cake was made in November, sometimes in October, and fed with brandy through the weeks, a teaspoon at a time through small holes poked in the base, to keep it moist and deepen its flavor. The pudding was made on Stir-Up Sunday, the last Sunday before Advent, the family taking turns to stir the mixture and make a wish, the silver threepenny bit, or, in later years, a new sixpence pressed into the dark, treacly battered before it went into the basin, tied with string, and set to steam for hours, the kitchen dense with the smell of brandy, and suet and dried fruit, and mixed spice. These were the smells of a particular English Christmas, and they came from the kitchen and nowhere else. Now, and here is where we returned to that bottle on the shelf. The camp coffee. It had sat there in the pantry for years. That dark bottle with its colonial label, its chicory and coffee essence, undisturbed. But at Christmas, something happened. The trifle was made. That great, important, multi-layered construction of sponge fingers soaked in sherry, tinned fruit and jelly, a custard made from bird's powder, a thick layer of whipped cream on top, and then the decoration, the chocolate vermicelli scattered across the cream. the crystallized cherries placed with precision, and a small strategic splash of the camp coffee. Just a few drops, worked into the cream layer or into the jelly itself to give the trifle that slight, mysterious depth of flavor that everyone noticed and no one could quite name. That was why it was kept. Not for coffee, which no one in the house really drank. Not for nostalgia exactly. But for this, the trifle, the Christmas trifle, which required it, and was wrong without it, and which tasted of the day itself. The camp coffee bottle was the trifle's secret. It was kept against the possibility of Christmas. And Christmas always came, and the secret was always worth keeping. And the gold-topped bottle? That second curiosity, placed on the step that cold December morning by the milkman. Channel Islands milk, top, gold top. The full cream, Jersey or Guernsey milk, with its extraordinary richness, the cream so thick at the neck of the bottle that you could pour the top inch into a jug and have something close to proper pouring cream. The milkman left one, just one, on the step in the first week of December, and when you saw that gold foil cap where the silver usually was, you knew. Not because anyone had told you, not because there was a sign or an announcement, simply because that bottle was different, and different meant special, and special meant Christmas was close enough to touch. The mother would use the gold top for the custard on Sunday, just once. The custard made with that milk was something beyond itself. Richer, deeper, more golden than usual. The vanilla scent lifting from the saucepan in a warmer, rounder way. One bottle of gold top. One Sunday custard. One small, annual luxury that asked for nothing in return except that you notice it. And you did. You always did. By the mid-60s, the shopping was beginning to change. The milkman still came. Would still come in most places, for decades more. And the greengrocer still had his bins of carrots and parsnips and King Edwards out on the pavement. The butcher still stood behind his marble counter with his cleaver and his apron. The sawdust on the floor. The smell of raw meat and cold stone. The baker still delivered, or you still went to him, because a factory-baked loaf and a baker-baked loaf were two different things, and everyone knew it. But Sainsbury's was opening its doors. Tesco was growing. Finefare had arrived on the high street. The co-op, long trusted for its dividend stamps, was modernizing its shops. The supermarket was brighter, had more choice. American cereals, a wider range of tinned goods, biscuits in packets rather than from the tin at the counter. It was convenient in a way that the daily rounds of individual shops was not. And yet, the daily round had been something more than convenient. It had been social. The 5-minute conversation with the greengrocer about whether the parsnips were good this week. The butcher who knew without asking that you wanted the neck end for stew. The baker's wife who'd save you a bloomer if you came in early. The supermarket replaced the errand. It did not replace the conversation, or rather it did, quietly and without announcement. And the kitchen changed with it, became slightly less connected to the people who supplied it, slightly more anonymous in its provisions. The mobile shop came round on Wednesdays, a converted van, its sides opening to reveal shelves of tinned goods and tea and cleaning materials. The driver also a salesman and a source of news. He knew which houses needed Heinz soup and which were getting low on Bisto. That too was slowly, inevitably giving way. Your mother knew exactly how many scoops of tea went into the pot. 2 for a small pot. 3 for the big one on Sundays. 1 extra if your father was working late and would want a strong cup when he came in. It was not written down anywhere. It was not a recipe. It was simply known, part of the body's knowledge, learned so thoroughly that it had become reflex, the hand going to the caddy and measuring without thought, the way a pianist's hand finds a chord without looking at the keys. That is what those kitchens built, over years and decades of the same daily round. Embodied knowledge, an intimacy with the materials of nourishment, a relationship with food that was not recreational or performative, but simply, profoundly necessary. The women who ran those kitchens, and it was women almost entirely in those years. The kitchen was their domain, their workplace, their kingdom, did not speak of it in terms of artistry or creativity. They cooked because the family had to eat. They baked because bought cakes were expensive. They preserved and pickled and stretched and contrived and made something from nothing, and made it again the next day, and the day after that. They got up in the cold and lit the gas, and made the tea, and started the day. And when the day was done, they were still in the kitchen, washing up by the light of the single overhead bulb, the cold tap running, their hands reddened by water and detergent, the drying up cloth draped over the oven rail to dry overnight. They did this in the knowledge that no one would call it remarkable, because it was not remarkable to them. It was simply what needed doing, and they did it. But consider the steadiness of it, the reliability. In a decade when the world was genuinely, rapidly, sometimes frighteningly changing, the Cold War's shadow falling across every newspaper front page, the old certainties of class and profession and place beginning to loosen, the young going somewhere their parents couldn't quite follow. The kitchen remained. The kettle still whistled. The lino was still cold under the feet. The Sunday joint still went in at 10:30. The 4 o'clock tea still happened. Every day, without fail, without variation, without drama. The kitchen was the still center of a turning world, and the women who kept it running were the reason that center held. They did not speak of love in the language that later decades would use. They did not, by and large, sit down and talk about feelings at the kitchen table, though they listened quietly while someone else spoke, and the listening was love in its purest form. They showed what they felt in the care they took, in the way the custard was poured to exactly cover the jam roly-poly, in the slice of bread and butter cut thick for the child coming home wet from school, in the pot of tea made for no reason other than that someone looked tired or sad, or simply in need of the ceremony of it, in the extra scone placed quietly at the edge of the plate, as if it had simply arrived there of its own accord. The lino still carries the memory of those feet. The pattern worn away by the stove, the cold hardness that was simply the ground you stood on. First thing in the morning, before anything else had started yet. The cup of tea arriving in your hands before you'd asked for it. The weight of it, the warmth of it, the steam rising. When did we last put the kettle on for no reason other than someone needed it? And does the world still offer that small kindness? It is a question worth sitting with. In a world of barista coffees and instant pods, of kitchens that are open plan and magazine perfect, and entirely unlike that small, cold-floored, condensation-windowed room in a terraced house in 1965. It is worth remembering what the kettle on meant. It was not about the tea, or rather, it was about the tea in the same way that a hand on a shoulder is about the hand. The gesture was the content. Someone put the kettle on because you were here, and you mattered. And whatever had happened, this moment, the boiling of the water, the warming of the pot, the pouring of the tea, the sitting down together, was real and present and sufficient. The kitchen in the 1960s was not beautiful in any way that a home magazine would have recognized then or would recognize now. The walls were cream or pale green, slightly marked by steam and the occasional splash from the hob. The draining board was wooden and darkened with water. The cooker had to be cleaned by hand with a cloth and a bottle of Zoff or flash, the enamel surface careful not to scratch. The biscuit tin was dented at one corner. The curtains at the kitchen window were faded slightly by the morning light and had been there since 1958. None of this was inadequate. All of it was home. There was the smell of carbolic soap, sharp and clean, used for scrubbing the wooden chopping board. There was the smell of bleach on the draining board on Saturdays. There was the warm, rising smell of bread in the oven. That impossible smell. That promise smell. The smell that has made human beings stop and turn their heads toward it for 10,000 years. There was the smell of the damp tea towel hung on the oven rail to dry, slightly musty, slightly warm. There was the jumper on the air above the kitchen, pulled up on its wooden rack and pulley. The wool of it, damp and warming, drying and the heat rising from the hob. All of these smells together were the kitchen's particular atmosphere, its specific climate, as distinctive and unrepeatable as a person's own presence in a room. In the evenings, when the supper things were done and the last cup of tea was being made, perhaps Horlicks, that thick, malty warmth in a mug, stirred slowly and drunk before bed. The kitchen wound down the way a clock winds down, gradually, thoughtfully, with a kind of dignity. The gas was checked, the back door locked, the light clicked off, the kitchen reverting to darkness with only the street lamp through the window, casting a thin rectangle of amber on the lino. The lino in the dark, the faint tick of the cooling cooker, the slight hiss of the water pipes settling for the night, the biscuit tin on the shelf, the tea caddy beside the pot, the brown Betty teapot under its cozy empty now, waiting. Everything in its place. The kitchen having done everything it was asked of it today without complaint, without recognition, without anything beyond the quiet, warm competence that is the highest form of love. Tomorrow, the kettle will whistle again. Tomorrow, the lino will be cold again under slippered feet. Tomorrow, the tea will be made and the pot will be warmed, and the milk will come in from the step, and the gas will pop and flare and settle into that blue ring of quiet, steady fire. Tomorrow, the smell of the roast, if it is Sunday, will rise through the house before anyone is properly awake. And then the kitchen will be warm, and the draining board will be stacked, and the condensation will run down the window in slow rivers, and someone who loves you will pour the tea without being asked. It is the sound of the kettle you hear first. That rising note, that gentle insistence. It has been sounding for your entire life, in kitchens just like this one. Cold-floored, condensation-windowed, formica-tabled, wireless murmuring. And it is sounding still somewhere, in a memory you did not know you still held so completely. You can hear it now, the whistle climbing. The gas turned down with a click, the steam clearing on the glass. The pot is warm. The tea is in. The cozy is on. And whatever happened during the day, whatever the world outside managed to do to make things difficult, uncertain, loud, unkind, tea at 4 o'clock made everything manageable again. It always did. Close your eyes for a moment if you like. The lino is cold under your feet. The kettle has just stopped. She is pouring the tea now, her hand slightly reddened from the cold water, setting the pot down on the trivet with the small, definitive sound of something being placed exactly where it belongs. The radio murmurs. The clock ticks. Bread is buttered and cut and waiting on the plate. You are in her kitchen. You are at her table. You are drinking her tea, and you would give anything at all, to be there one more time.